This is the Atari 8-Bit Podcast.
Okay, Lane, when you get your head and your heart together, you can be useful and help the company out and help other people out.
This is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-Bit Podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Lane Winner was an Atari employee for about a decade. He worked in the software development support group, as a programmer, and as an engineer. He's the author of Atari's Graph-It, a contributor to Re Atari, and designer of the XEP-80 80-column peripheral. Lane wrote several early releases for Atari Program Exchange, Basic Cross-Reference Utility, Basic Renumber Utility, and Variable Changer. This interview took place on April 20th, 2016. So it's taken a long time to get an interview with you. What have you been so busy with? What are you up to these days?
Oh, pretty much doing what I've been doing all my life. Lots of programming, helping folks out, giving seminars, that kind of stuff. So the good news is it keeps me busy. I don't get bored. And I'm constantly learning from folks and processes and technology. So never a boring moment here.
Good. Excellent. All right, so we're going to hop in the Wayback Machine, and I would like you to tell me the story before the beginning. I want to know how you got interested in computers and kind of the run-up to how you got hired by Atari.
Oh, sure. Can I preface this with a mild apology for any of the folks I was less than polite to during my years at Atari? Sometimes my passion gets out of hand. So,
well, were you a jerk?
There were moments when I was not as polite as I should have been.
Okay.
We'll leave it at that. But
okay.
I haven't heard all your interviews, so I don't know if folks were bothered by me, but I just remember that there were times when I could have been more tactful and so forth. So, anyway, my parents have always been supportive of my engineering interests, like I guess from day one or something. So they would buy me things, whether it's engineering toys or give me puzzles, that kind of stuff. So to me, computers were just an extension of a logical engineering process. Digital computers more so than analog, but so it goes. One of my early toys was a thing called Digicomp. You probably know about Digicomp. A little plastic and metal computer. It was basically a state machine with some gates in it. That came out in 1963, I think, and a little logic tool. So from then on, I said, I like this stuff. So went to college, did computers there, then dropped out for a little bit, and then I had a neighbor at the time, Ed Pollack, who co-founded Versatech. He said, hey, Lane, why don't you get focused and come work at Versatech? So I worked at Versatech for a year and a half and learned all about various mainframes, mini computers, and so forth. And then he helped me get a job at Atari. So I thank Ed for that. And my first employer at Atari was Dale Yoakum, who you've interviewed. So that's how I at least got in there. And I was in the what we called the home computer division applications side, not the game side or the OS side, but the applications. So anyway, there had been a lot of interest prior to that, but that was the first real professional dabble into computers.
So what did you start doing when you were there?
Okay. Dale's first assignment to me was, can you come up with a application program? And he had some ideas, and I said, well, I can run with this thing, a graphical interface sort of thing. Graphical interface is the wrong word, but it created graphical representation of formulas or data or whatever, and we called it Graph-It. And by that time, I'd figured out it. I was in there about 3 months, and then started getting the handle on how everything was working. So I was able to make use of various screen tricks and editor tricks and so forth, so that you could enter the formula in BASIC, and it would compile it for you and or tokenize it and present it on the screen. So that was my first contribution for the Atari experience there. So during that time, of course, I met everybody. Chris and Carl von Lohenfeld, Dave Getcher, all the folks I was working immediately with, Carla Mamitsky and Dave Getcher, and all the rest of the folks, the game designers. We were all in Building 1272 at the time, so it was basically just a fountain of information, a bunch of brilliant people all over the place. I could go across the coin-op area and so forth. So I met all the people that were there at the time. Prior to my showing, folks like Nolan and Whitehead and crew had all left, so there was a bit of a informational vacuum in some sense, and that's why Chris later on put together his team to fill that void, which I'm thankful for. But anyway, so my first thing with Dale was doing Graph-It, and it turned out to be an okay program. So
I think I didn't know until recently, well, actually I had an old email from you, but I don't think it's publicly known that you wrote Graph-It. It's not like you were credited on the box or anything. So you said there was some self-modifying code in there, which is interesting. When you enter a function, it goes in there and actually tweaks the program itself. That's cool.
Yeah, and I guess you understand how that's done. Mm-hmm. Because the OS folks had put in this cute little reading function on the screen, so that if you set a bit and you put the cursor in the right place, it would just read the screen, and you happen to be in the basic interpreter, and it would say, "Oh, go read whatever the user typed." Mm-hmm. And then if there was a failure, it knew it, and it would print out the failure, so you could go edit your line of code there. So it was a cute little feature. There were several corner cases I had to deal with, like longer lines or special characters, all that kind of stuff. And I had to turn the screen off while that was being processed. I didn't want the user to know what was going on. So.
Right.
But, it was a fun little thing. And at that time, I learned about we were using NTSC at the time, and they had PAL and CCAM elsewhere. And NTSC had this color artifacting aspect to the pixels, so you could get orange or purple pixels and so forth on the high-res screens, which was interesting. So we could actually do multicolored graphs based on that artifacting approach. So,
right. Was it that program? Its biggest problems, I think, is that you cannot save your graphs or print the graphs. Was that a decision you made based on time you had to do it, or just not a feature Atari wanted? Do you remember?
Fair enough. I believe at some point I was starting to print out stuff, but I think it was, for my part, probably a time constraint. I don't see why we couldn't have printed them. We didn't have a lot of color printers at the time. We had that thermal printer and maybe one other printer. But it should have been doable. I don't see why not. In fact, I think somebody enhanced the program later anyway.
Right. APX came out with an enhancement to Graph-It feature that added some of that.
Yeah.
All right. So I have a list of things that I want to ask you about, but if you remember, it probably makes more sense to go on order. So I will throw it out there. Do you remember what came next after Graph-It?
Oh, sure. It was soon after that Chris had mentioned the SDSG, I guess, Software Development Support Group, and somehow I drifted over into his organization. Physically, I stayed in the same place, I think, but we eventually moved to another building. But there may have been one or two more small utilities or something that I did under Dale. I forget now. Then moved on to helping with other programmers and so forth with their code. I even helped Chris with one of his programs. And then we started thinking about the seminars and the book. The book took a little while longer. We first did some Byte magazine articles and so forth.
The book being De Re Atari.
Yeah. One thing Chris was great at helping me with was public speaking. He took me up to one of the colleges there, and that time I was totally scared, couldn't say anything. But the next time he got me into a users group, and so I thought, well, what do I want to present? And I said, well, let me present how the Atari Basic works. And I was scared, frightened, whatever led me prior to the talk, but since I'd prepared enough material and I knew it well enough, I said, well, I'll just stand on what I know. And when I stood up, all the fears stayed in the chair. So I felt great. So, and that was a fun experience. So then later on, we started doing the seminars and so forth, and then putting the book together at Re Atari and so forth. So to me, that said, okay, Lane, when you get your head and your mind, your head and your heart together, you can be useful and help the company out and help other people out. Just as an aside from working with Chris and crew, there was a letter that was mailed to our boss, Roger Badisher, in '81 from a young, very young, business owner named Mark Benioff, thanking Jerry Jessup and myself for the work we did to help him out. And he's since gone on to do great things.
Right.
But
he's like a kabillionaire of Salesforce.com. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it showed me that, yes, when I get my act together, I can be useful. So that was fun.
Nice. All right, so De Re Atari was serialized in Byte, and you did these seminars you did, were these at Atari, or was this a traveling show? I mean, how did those happen?
They were both. We did many at Atari and many outside. At the same time, we were also visiting the various trade shows like CES and so forth. And when we would travel to the other shows, there were times we'd get to meet some famous people, astronauts and whatnot, and that was always enjoyable to encounter these folks who have a completely different experience of the world than I did. So, and yeah, we got to go see Second City in Chicago and all that kind of stuff. So that was neat. Obviously, travel in those days was a little different than travel now, but you could get into the plane without any checks and so forth. But the neat thing, again, was standing in front of a group of 200 people and, like, for 8 hours or whatever, talking and not being concerned about it, just expressing. And a lot of great folks came to Atari because of our seminars. I can't list them all, but there's Greg Riker, and you'd interviewed Jerry White and several other folks who were a great force in Atari. So I again thank Chris for organizing all that and making it all happen. So it was fun stuff. Yeah, and I learned a lot. There were always questions, and I entered sort of a different mode when I was in that environment speaking to people, think on your feet mode as opposed to sit at your desk and solve problem mode. So it was more exciting in a way. So
sure.
It was fun.
Okay, so after De Re Atari, what came next?
Lots of little things. Let's see. I didn't publish a whole lot of separate programs, mostly utilities. Again, the seminars. I worked with, it it turns out I had like 21 bosses, I think, somewhere near that number. A lot of folks did over the years when they stayed there. And so I was doing various OS support or application support, not really game support. I'd help the game designers once in a while, but after Trammell took over, then that all split apart, but I don't want to bump into that quite yet. But it was more sort of below-the-radar stuff. And again, you'd mentioned you might be interested in this. I was working in the background on a two-player, whatever, multiplayer version of the Star Raiders game that I had in mind that used the modem and so forth. So that was a background project where I was learning more things doing that. So there was a lot of interaction with all the other people in the company, doing things, helping them out, writing documentation, putting together more information than just Re Atari.
Sure.
But I forget if there were many more titles of things I developed. There were a couple things. The what was it? The 80-column monitor.
Right.
So
the XEP-80 hardware.
Yeah.
Understand you were the primary creator of that.
Yeah. So
tell me about that.
I think it was 8051 or variant of that. And so interfacing to the Atari system and so forth. It was fun. Again, as long as we were on all the 8-bit and so forth, space was always an issue in terms of putting the program in, and then speed, because these weren't the fastest processors. You had to come up with quick algorithms with the speed constraints you had. So there was fun stuff there. We had the different character sets we'd put together and so forth. I think it was a team effort that we put that machine together. It was okay. It had a little niche there that served the purpose. I kept some of the old documentation on a few things, but over the years I say, well, okay, not that relevant anymore. But
right.
So it was fun and gave me how some of the video graphics work and so forth. So
I need to circle back and talk a little bit more about so you were working on a multiplayer modem version of Star Raiders. What happened to that? Do you know why? Was it not finished? Was it not finished but not released, or what?
Fair enough. It was never finished. Part of the reason was it was such a background project and there were so many other things on the flow. For one thing, I was working at the same time on another thing, an Atari 800 debugger. That was before the XL came out. The 800 itself had a little limited memory range that it worked in. Actually, I'm sure folks have mentioned this to you. If you take the Atari memory footprint and just add a 0 to the addresses, you get the PC memory footprint. So that was kind of cute. For some reason, they were very similar. So I figured out a way we could jam a jump instruction to some debug code if you pressed a magic button or hit a breakpoint or some such thing. But then when the XL came out, they used a different system bus and so forth, so that no longer applied. But anyway, the game was a fun idea, and some of the basic concepts. One was we were using this 300 baud modem, which is basically 30 bytes a second you can get across. But at the time, it was a full duplex modem, but most folks were using it in a half duplex mode, so either send or receive, but never both. So I thought, well, why not do both? And then you get double the bandwidth, and you get more information across. So the initial way I would get that thing going, I'd kick off a send-receive sequence, and then I'd whistle into the data stream to get the other direction going, the parallel path going. Mm-hmm. So then I could have the full 30 duplex working. So that was cute. But anyway, and things like just send relevant information across. It was all joystick controlled, so joystick didn't even eat up 8 bits of a byte. So I could send the deltas across each time of what was going on and worry about bad data after the fact. Generally, the data was good, so if it was good, then just keep going. If it was bad, then glitch the screen a bit or something. But the other thing, I thought about the 3D graphics and so forth, and one of the things I noticed was, okay, where's the other player going to be, and what's the other player's orientation going to be? And I just developed these 3D spheres for X, Y, and Z, and then I presented that information to the game designers. I had a big discussion about it, and they came over and they were listening. They go, "Oh yeah, we know about those spheres, and we have some cute little tricks to optimize them so they run quicker." I'm going, "Oh great!" So in general with engineering, you take enough paths, they all tend to lead toward the same place, the most efficient place anyway. So I thought that was interesting, but it was such a low-key project. I even took it to trade shows and was working on it at some of the trade shows, but I tended to not focus on it, so it just never got finished.
Sure.
But it was fun learning experience. So there's that.
I understand you wrote the Plato terminal emulator for the Atari.
Yeah, that's true. One of those things. That was, I was working for Chris at the time, I believe. And for some reason, a good reason, we had a Plato CDC terminal. Well, CDC was one of their computers, but we Data General, I guess. We had I believe that's right. It was Data General, wasn't it?
I believe so.
Yeah. So we had one of their touchscreen monitors, interfaces, in 1272, I believe at the time, and it had a 512 by 512 graphical display, and then a sort of a crude touchscreen interface in the middle, overlaying that. So, but the interface from a software standpoint seemed pretty straightforward. Just here's where the graphics go and so forth. So we thought about it and said, well, 512 will fit on 320 if we scroll across it. So I did the version that had the scrolled version, the scrolled screen of the 512 by 512. Now later on, Vince, I think, took it over and did a cartridge that he was able to scale that down to 320 or whatever. But the initial one was just this big thing, and we did the scrolling. And there were 2 types of scrolling. With the coarse scrolling, you got everything. With the fine scrolling, you actually lost a couple pixels, but so it goes. So, yeah, it was basically just setting up the interface, getting the data, so forth, and handling the scrolling. And then I handed it off to Joe Miller, who optimized a few things, and off it went to other places. So that was a fun little thing. Again, a learning experience. Mainly it was all about learning there, even though I was helping the company and producing. At the same time, I was helping me learn more about these things. So it was a fun thing.
Cool. So you wrote several Atari Program Exchange titles, and they are such early titles that, my theory on these is that these super early APX titles tended to be internal Atari projects that then they used to seed the first catalog. So there was, you can tell me if I'm right about that. You did the basic cross-reference utility and the basic Renumber utility and a variable changing utility, and then you contributed to a basic utility diskette. Yeah,
that sounds right. And I think Jerry mentioned I did a variable destroyer or some such thing, and so that you could help with the early encryption, I guess, but just a security feature. But so we the idea was make use of all the features because it was not a truly compiled BASIC. We could do all these cute little things to it, still using the cartridge and so forth. And I thought, why not? I understood how it worked, and these were easy, low-hanging fruit, I guess, things you could do with it. So it was fun and useful at the same time.
Nice. Do you happen to have a copy of any of those? Because one of those no one has managed to archive it yet, so we're still looking on the hunt for the basic Renumber Utility disk.
Oh, I see. Well, I'll see. I don't know if I have any floppies left, but I'll see what I can do there.
Cool. Yeah. While we're on the subject, do you have stuff and documentation and things? You had mentioned to me in an email years ago that you had some notes you had made when developing things, engineering notes, but I didn't ask much about it at the time. But do you still have any of that stuff?
Some. Yeah, let's see. I have the notes on the old Star Raiders, what's it called? Reimagining. Probably some notes on the variable name changer, I'm not sure. I kept some of it. I didn't keep, I heard your interview with Jeff Bell, who apparently kept everything he could. And for me, I've had to move a few times and so forth, and when it comes down to stuffing stuff in boxes, I said, well, no. So a lot of the old Atari hardware disappeared, but I may have kept some things. I did keep some documentation. There are some, what do you want to call them, confidential documents that I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable releasing even now. I mean, the name still exists out there and so forth, arts and stuff like that. I mean, I can talk about who I worked for and so forth, but I can't necessarily talk about who others worked for. So, and I didn't know the financials and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I've got a few things, and if you're interested, I can share them.
I'm super interested. If you listened to a couple of interviews, you probably heard my spiel that I will borrow anything that you have. I will scan it. I'll return it to you if you want it returned, and let's get that stuff. Before the next move when they get lost, let's get that stuff scanned.
Oh yeah, and there are plenty of phone books online already. So my phone books just kind of still would either duplicate or they'd fill in the missing gap of 1 year or something like that.
Sure, yeah. I'm particularly interested in the engineering notes and thought processes for creating things and stuff that you have that no one else has.
Yeah, and as long as Atari doesn't own IP on any of this stuff, so that's the other issue. So.
What else did you do 8-bit wise before we move on to other things?
Oh, let's see. The fun stuff, well, just as an aside, I worked with Bill Wilkinson when he was doing his DOS development and so forth. Learned from him, Paul Lawton and his group, and a whole bunch of different groups within the main organization. So I was helping out with all these folks and learning what they were working on, and so that contributed to my understanding when I gave the seminars and so forth. I don't know if you interviewed Harry Brown. Did you interview Harry Brown?
No, I don't know that name.
Okay. I think he was the one who had the Atari license plate. And he was in our roughly immediate group, and he did a bunch of things there. But I remember him saying that Lane didn't publish much, but helped out a lot. I'm going, yeah, that sounds about right. So, for some reason, I would always get, which was to me a good thing, I'd get started on something and say, oh, it's firefighting time. So off we go. And so those shoes, if you like, seemed to fit well. So the seminars fell into the firefighting mode because, here's the need for an info dump, and we do that. So I did less on the outright long-term project and more on the short-term mini project for helping out either with somebody else's program or documentation, that sort of stuff. So I just can't think of all the things I did. I could pull out a resume and see. Yeah, it was 10 years. I left just after the earthquake here in California, in the San Jose area. So in '89. So it was fun 10 years. So, but yeah, on the 8-bit side, they were fun too. And actually, I've heard some of the interviews, and Atari was great and all. And yes. But I've been to other companies where it's also great, and I can go into any room I choose, and there's a very, to me, a brilliant person with lots of experience, and I can learn from them. So, to me, wherever I go, there's that experience. I've been at Phoenix and several other places, like where I'm now at Oracle. I can go and chat with people and learn. So it's not that experience is long gone or anything. It's still with us if we look at it with the right perspective. So I don't look at that as something that I miss per se. It was fun, but I'm still doing it. So
let's see. You contributed some programs to the Professional Atari Programmers Information Exchange that was run by Jerry White.
Right.
And,
there were several utilities and things. I forget now. Well, although I still have his correspondence, actually. But anyway, that was more fallout, if you like, from what we were doing for debugging purposes. There was always the need for debugging tools. So we'd put together little packages of, here's this feature, here's this thing. A lot of the low-level stuff was in assembly. We did have, did you interview, Kathy Forte was doing, I think, Pascal at that, in the early...
No, I haven't talked to Kathy.
Okay. And so we did get some higher-level languages going, besides the basic and so forth. But we were always looking for ways to debug or improve the screen graphics or whatever. So there were always these little tricks we'd come across. And some of our folks knew the original designers. I mean, I met a few of the original chip designers who were still there. Some had left, but like George was still there and so forth. So we got the tricks from them. And then people like Jack Palovich and Lennon Dyer were brilliant, and so I chatted with them and got information from those folks. And we could put down this information either into a presentation or a note or a small program. So there was that kind of stuff that was being disseminated. And Atari wasn't too concerned about distributing the information. Prior to Chris's effort, Atari was real secretive, and so that we all perceived that to be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow he managed to convince upper management that let's share, and you'll reap the results. So reap the benefits. So we did, and that happened, and so that to me that was a good thing. So once we started disseminating this stuff, people said, "Oh yeah, you can actually do a lot of things." They did that cute little. The game I'm talking about, the split screen with the joystick, and it had the two little balls or the single ball that you'd pass back and forth and
ball blazer.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So there was an example of Chris's effort, basically. So I thought, well, good for them. So and then I had a buddy on the hardware side, Jose Valdez, who came up with some memory mapped mechanisms and so forth on the 800 side, so we could actually have more memory and so forth, and multiple RAM mappings, and so they were able to do Ball Blazer with this multiple mapping switching on the fly kind of stuff. So all that was the result of folks getting interested in the group effort, the entire industry group effort. If you say all these folks out there in the world were part of our group. It worked out pretty well. Later on, things didn't go so well, and it kind of all fell down. But before those times, there was a lot of infusion of knowledge and talent, and it was quite interesting. So, yeah.
Cool. So you helped bring up the Atari IBM PC clone.
Okay. Yeah, what did we call it at the time? I forget what it was. That was, I guess, around the time Jack Trammell took over. Is that 84? Is that about the time we're talking?
I believe so. I'm really less conversant in the PC side of things because PCs are not interesting. Atari 8-bits are. But I think it was an interesting experiment that Atari tried to come up with a PC clone, and I don't know. I guess my question is, did anybody think this was a good idea?
Oh, I'm sure it was. I mean, again, I think Jack and crew had just taken over, and I got to meet Sam and Gary and Leonard and Jack and their legal team and all the rest of them. And for me, it was a positive experience. I was sad that they laid off so many people. I mean, we were at 11,000 and went down to several hundred. But at the same time, I was still there. I mean, I was wiring up terminals at one point, but so it goes. So, but even that was learning, so I didn't mind. And I got to meet a bunch of, Trammell's brought in a bunch of interesting chip designers and so forth from their group that had going before. So, again, I met great talents, and they were working on this hardware. And yes, I was involved both were on the software and the hardware, or firmware and hardware side of that thing. Both aspects, because I dealt with, in the 8-bit world, to backtrack just a moment, since these machines were basically set-top boxes, I suppose. They were computers, but they had encoded video output for RF, right? So these weren't just dedicated monitors with RGB. They actually had to produce a signal that you could pick up with your television. So they encoded all the way to the NTSC and then modulated that out on whatever channel you wanted. So, well, 3 or 4. So basically, noise became the principal problem in these systems. And the big joke was, oh, look, you can see the refresh bars on the screen. Mm-hmm. And if you know what I'm talking about, there were these 9 vertical bars that would appear on the TV screen on any game you were playing. So we learned that the basic grounding and planes and so forth, and removing your data lines from around. In other words, your switching address switching lines shouldn't pass across the RF circuit and so forth, and then you won't get these lines. So at one point, I was using some of the Tektronix oscilloscopes that the big ones that could basically, I would take an entire screen. These were 80 times a second refresh rates that they were doing. They basically didn't do true interleave. They did a 60 hertz interpretation of it, and so I'd take an entire screen and stretch it out into one trace, so I could look at individual pixels. But that required turning all the lights off, putting a little shield over the monitor and the oscilloscope, and then showing the traces. So I could see which address lines were switching when noise would appear on a pixel. And I say, oh, well, there's your problem. This trace runs near here, and so move these traces around and so forth. So I got into the RF aspects of these, basic, whatever you want to call it, noise on the processors, and how that interferes with your display. So when they were doing the Atari version of the PC and so forth, I was looking at that. I was looking at how their color signal was generated and the circuits they were using, and when you do true color on NTSC, you get this scrolling color effect on the edges. But Atari, because in their 60 hertz, they had a different implementation. They did an alternating, so you didn't see the color scroll occur. It made it for slightly nicer looking, and your dithered regions were a little cleaner looking. So we opted to try that out. Now, this computer really didn't go anywhere, but it was fun. Again, I learned more stuff because it was different than the 8-bit and so forth. So anyway, it was a fun experience. So
nice. So what haven't I asked you about the 8-bit days that I should have?
Oh, let's see. I had a little list here. I want to speak good of some of the folks that I've heard bad elsewhere. Ray Kassar, to me, regardless of what else has been said, for me, he seemed to help out at some point. We were at one of the trade shows. He was giving a speech at one of the ballrooms or something for the Atari effort. And I was near the front of the crowd when the talk ended. He spotted me and said, "You work in engineering, don't you?" And I go, "Oh," I thought, well, okay, he recognizes me. So I introduced myself, and he said, "Is there anything he could do to help the organization and our effort?" And I said, I was thinking, well, here's a golden opportunity. Let's say something. So I said there was a bit of a lack of communication between the engineering departments. They had become a little too alienated from each other, and I was thinking that if there were more communication, we could share ideas, we might improve the situation. So about a month later, magically these meetings started occurring, these interdepartmental engineering meetings where people would give presentations. So I don't know if that was coincidence or not, but I thought that was a positive experience. So,
nice.
So there's that. Obviously, other folks have mentioned this. Atari did have their big game room that the workers could go in and play games all day if they wanted. But I went in there once or twice, and it was an experience. But I thought, well, sorry, I'm on the application side, and I got to focus on all these computer applications. So I didn't spend much time in there. But it was fun. The end of the 8-bit days was, again, sad in a way, but beneficial in a way, too. They started coalescing or, selling gobs of stuff, hardware, software, whatever, to reduce the number of buildings they had. And they were collecting all these things into one or two big warehouses there. So several of us who were still working there at the time would make pilgrimages over to the warehouses and say, "Oh, here's a dozen Tektronix scopes. Maybe we could use one of them." Or here's this or that, or "Oh, here's a lost copy of so-and-so." So before they were these things got sold off in lots, we would scrounge around and grab some stuff. So, that was sad but interesting at the same time. We saw like 100 Xerox copiers all collected in one place. That was just fun. But anyway, yeah, so there were probably a dozen other things, like some of your folks have said. We could talk for hours. But that was, for the most part, about it for the 8-bit. Are you interested in the Trammell section? Otherwise,
Sure.
There isn't that much to say.
Yeah, tell me what you've got to say. Absolutely.
Again, more working on things, helping folks out. I worked for about 3 or 4 different bosses there. I worked for Tom Brightman for a while in product development and so forth. It was good stuff. Working on the newer stuff, the new 16-bit versions and so forth of their computers, and some of the game designers still stuck around. Some didn't, and basically we stayed in the same building pretty much after that. I was in 1196 twice, once in the 8-bit days and once then when Trammell took over. So I, at one point, had accumulated so many documents and so forth. I had this little office in a corner somewhere, and I jammed all these file cabinets into it. I had 9 or 10 file cabinets of stuff, plus a little workbench and so forth. And you could barely get in. You had to do this snake around all the file cabinets to get to where I was sitting. So after a while, I realized that's a bit much, and I don't need to be the archiver of all this stuff. So I started tossing some stuff, and they actually did have an archival area in another warehouse that they kept for a long time. And I go over there from time to time, but eventually I said, okay, guys, move my stuff over there because I just can't keep storing this stuff. So, yeah, so it was fun, and at 10 years, it actually tied into one of the companies I worked at later. Atari did the portfolio, right? And John Fagans, I think, was the guy in charge of that. And I later on worked at what was the name of the company? Pocket, which was founded by some of the folks who'd worked on the Atari portfolio. So I thought, interesting. And Pocket actually did the first handheld touchscreen little device that's so popular now. But so I thought, well, they missed opportunity there. But anyway, so it was getting a little, for me, a little stagnant, I guess, at the end of 10 years. And I mean, Jeff Bell was still going at the coin op and so forth, but for me, it was time to move on. I went up to Redwood City with Vince and the other fellow's name, Mike. So I left Atari, but no regrets there. It was all fun and a good learning experience. So, and I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. So, did you interview Fred Thorlin at all?
Yes, he was one of my very first interviews.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I had, he and I got along great, and sometimes working with him. So, great bunch of people over there. In terms of number of people I've met, probably I've met the most through the Atari experience, basically because of the seminars and all the talks and so forth we gave, and the book and everything. I've met a lot of people since, but just in terms of sheer number, it's probably the most through Atari. So, again, very fun.
Nice. All right, last question. If you could send a message to the Atari 8-bit community that still exists, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Well, let's see. I'd say never lose that spark that got you there in the first place. So it's always look forward, enjoy what you did, but keep moving forward and keep doing. So it's for me, it's always fun, and I hope for everyone else it's always fun. So
great.
That's all I have.
All right. Thank you so much, Lane.
Oh, thank you very much.
If you enjoyed these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.